I still remember the exact moment it happened. I was standing barefoot in the bathroom, letting the steam fog the mirror, when my eyes caught something in the drain. At first, I thought it was just the usual mess of my own graying strands. But no, it was a long, silky blonde hair, shining almost gold against the porcelain. And that couldn't have come from me. I froze. For a second, I even laughed to myself. One of those hollow, bitter laughs you give when the truth punches you in the gut. I'm 68 years old. My days of golden locks are long gone. And Franklin, my Franklin, well, his hair is thinning, sure, but it's as dark as the day I met him at church 3 years ago. That hair didn't belong to either of us. I bent down, touched it with the tip of my finger, and a shiver went straight up my spine. Something about the way it clung to the drain felt invasive, like a stranger had stepped into my private world. That was the moment the first crack split open in the life I thought I was living. See, Franklin wasn't just some man. He was supposed to be my second chance. The person who pulled me out of widowhood when I thought I'd never laugh at another silly joke, never share another warm meal across the table. I trusted him. I believed in him. And now, staring at that blonde hair, all I could feel was betrayal dripping down my back like the last drops of shower water. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't scream, didn't demand answers. Instead, I tucked that shock into my chest and let it simmer, because something inside me whispered that this was only the beginning, and I needed to know the truth. And that's when the suspicion began to grow. After finding that blonde hair, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it came from the plumber last week. Maybe it clung to Franklin's coat from the grocery store. My mind searched desperately for innocent explanations, because the alternative was too painful to face. But once you start looking, you can't unsee things. I noticed Franklin glancing at his watch more often, like he was always waiting for some invisible appointment. He'd step outside just as his phone buzzed, muttering something about business calls that seemed to drag on far too long. When he came back in, his voice was calm, but his eyes told a different story. I caught him avoiding my gaze more than once, and each time, my chest tightened a little more. One evening, while we sat at the table, he mentioned Dorothy, my Dorothy, the woman who'd been by my side since high school, the one who held my hand when my first husband died, the one who sat with me in hospital waiting rooms. He spoke her name casually, as though it were nothing more than small talk, but it landed in my ears like a warning bell. Why Dorothy? Why now? The thought crept in before I could stop it. That blonde hair. Dorothy's hair had always been a warm brown, but she'd mentioned a while back she was thinking of changing it, just for fun. The memory pressed against me like a weight I couldn't push away. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Franklin was a good man, that Dorothy was like a sister to me. But every little detail piled up, brick by brick, building a wall of unease between me and the life I thought I had. At night, when the house was quiet, I'd lie awake listening to Franklin's steady breathing beside me and wonder who he was dreaming of. I told myself not to dig, not to ruin what little peace I had left. But deep down, I knew the truth wasn't going to stay hidden forever. And that was the moment my unease began shifting into resolve. I needed to know. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Something inside me whispered that this was only the beginning, and I was about to find out just how deep the betrayal ran. The days that followed turned into a quiet storm inside my mind. I started paying attention to things I had once brushed off. Franklin's routines suddenly seemed rehearsed. He left the house at the same time, returned with the same tired excuses, and his phone became almost an extension of his hand. He angled it away when I walked into the room, the screen dimming before I could glimpse a name or a message. I began noticing patterns. His calls always seemed to come late in the evening, right after dinner, when he'd step outside under the porch light, lowering his voice so only the crickets could hear. He'd return with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I told myself I was imagining things, but deep down, my gut knew better. One night, lying awake, I did something I hadn't done in years. I picked up my tablet and opened Facebook. Franklin wasn't much for social media, but Dorothy was. Scrolling through her page felt strange, almost like trespassing. She had always been so open with me, sharing recipes, family photos, memories of our youth. But as I kept scrolling, a new picture caught my breath. Dorothy smiling under the warm light of a salon chair. Her once brown hair now gleamed a bright blonde, the exact shade I had pulled from the shower drain. My stomach dropped. My hand trembled as I zoomed in on the photo, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was as if the universe had handed me a cruel puzzle piece I hadn't asked for, and it fit too perfectly. That blonde hair wasn't from a stranger. It was from Dorothy. The betrayal cut deeper because this wasn't just about Franklin anymore. This was Dorothy, the girl who passed me notes in class. The woman who held me together when I buried my first husband. The friend I trusted with secrets I never told another soul. If Franklin was guilty, then so was she. And the weight of that truth pressed down on me until I could hardly sit still. I tried to tell myself it could be a coincidence. Maybe she'd been over recently. Maybe the hair was left behind innocently. But the timing, the secrecy, the way Franklin had spoken her name, it all pointed to something darker. The house felt colder after that night. Every glance at Franklin was laced with questions I couldn't bring myself to ask. Every memory of Dorothy now carried a bitter edge. I felt trapped between disbelief and certainty, between heartbreak and anger. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. If I wanted answers, I had to look her in the eye. The woman who had been my best friend for over 50 years might also be the woman who had stolen the man I thought I could trust. And so I decided I would confront Dorothy. I needed the truth, even if it shattered everything I had left. I asked Dorothy to meet me for lunch at our usual spot, a small cafe tucked away on the corner where we'd shared countless meals over the years. The place hadn't changed: the smell of fresh bread, the quiet clinking of silverware, the hum of conversations around us. But everything between us had changed. At least, it had for me. When she walked in, I felt my heart skip. Her hair the same golden blonde I'd seen in that photo. The same color I'd pulled from my shower drain gleamed under the midday light. She smiled, wide and easy, as if nothing in the world had shifted. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile, but inside, I was unraveling. Sitting across from her, I studied every detail. Her nails, polished and new. The way she avoided my eyes when I asked about Franklin. The little pause in her breath before she answered, as though rehearsing a lie. I'd known Dorothy nearly my whole life. I could read her better than anyone. And what I saw in her that day wasn't the friend who used to braid my hair in the locker room or bring me casseroles after my husband died. What I saw was betrayal, dressed up in lipstick and laughter. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, to slam my hand on the table and watch her mask crack. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, nodding, stirring my soup, letting the silence stretch between us. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than any words. The truth was written all over her face, and I knew it. Franklin hadn't just betrayed me. Dorothy had too. The two people I trusted most in this world had carved a secret space where I didn't belong. The realization was like being cut twice with the same knife. I felt anger burn beneath my skin, but I held it close, feeding it carefully. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not here. Not now. As the lunch dragged on, I smiled when expected, answered politely, all while my mind sharpened around a single thought: I couldn't let this slide. Betrayal this deep demanded a response, and I wasn't going to sit quietly and let them both think I was blind. When we finally hugged goodbye, her perfume lingered on my jacket, sickly sweet and cloying. It clung to me like the blonde hair in the drain, a reminder I couldn't wash away. That night, lying awake beside Franklin, I made my choice. I wasn't going to confront them with tears. I was going to remind them that betrayal has consequences, and I already knew exactly where I'd start. I had always thought of myself as a woman of quiet dignity, the kind who handled life's disappointments with grace. But betrayal carves something different into you. It doesn't just hurt, it awakens a part of you that refuses to be dismissed. That night, after watching Dorothy's blonde hair shimmer in the cafe light and seeing Franklin's forced smile at dinner, I knew exactly what I was going to do. The idea came to me as naturally as breathing. His shampoo sat in the shower, an expensive brand he swore by, neatly lined up among my own bottles. And all it would take was a switch, just one silent substitution, to tilt the balance back into my hands. I drove to the drugstore the next morning, pretending it was just another errand. My heart raced as I scanned the shelves. Hair removal cream, rows of them, lined like little soldiers. I picked the strongest one I could find, designed for coarse hair, the kind plastered with warnings in bold letters. Exactly what I needed. Back home, I moved carefully, like a surgeon preparing for delicate work. I unscrewed the cap of his shampoo, poured the fragrant liquid down the drain, and filled the bottle with the cream. I even saved a few drops of the original shampoo, swirling them in to mask the chemical edge. When I set the bottle back in its spot, nothing looked out of place. Franklin would never suspect. The first day, nothing happened. He showered, humming off key as usual, and I sat in the kitchen, waiting. I told myself to be patient. Revenge isn't about speed, it's about timing. By the second day, I noticed him running his hand through his hair more often, frowning at his reflection when he thought I wasn't watching. Patches of silver strands clung to his pillow. My stomach tightened, but not with guilt, with satisfaction. By the third morning, the panic set in. He stumbled into the kitchen with a baseball cap pulled low, muttering about how his hair felt different, softer, almost thinner in places. I poured his coffee, calm as ever, and nodded along, as if I had no idea what was happening. Inside, though, I savored every second. It was almost comical, the way he tried to cover it up, adjusting his cap in the mirror, combing his thinning hair to disguise the gaps, avoiding my eyes when I asked how he was feeling. I kept my face serene, my tone sympathetic. But beneath the surface, I felt the quiet thrill of justice unfolding right before me. The cream worked faster than I had expected. Within a week, his once proud silver mane had turned into a patchwork of thin spots and wisps, his vanity unraveling along with each strand. He grew restless, checking his reflection at all hours, waking in the middle of the night to peer into the bathroom mirror. I pretended not to notice, sipping tea in the kitchen as if nothing were wrong. And through it all, I felt my power return. For so long, I had been the trusting partner, the loyal friend. Now, I was the one holding the secret, the one smiling politely while betrayal revealed its cost. Watching Franklin unravel didn't erase the hurt, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in months: control. And as I watched him cling desperately to his dwindling hair, I knew this was only the beginning. There was still more truth to uncover, and I was ready for it. Franklin's unraveling had reached its peak. By then, his hair was falling out in clumps, leaving him desperate, almost frantic. He paced the house at odd hours, muttering under his breath, pulling at hats and scarves like a man possessed. And that was when I decided to press him, not about the hair, but about the truth I had been circling all along. I kept my tone steady, my face calm, though inside my chest felt like a storm. I asked him, simply, "Why, Dorothy?" I let the silence stretch, the kind that gnaws at a guilty man. His hands trembled as he tried to explain, fumbling with excuses that sounded thinner than his hair. And then, like a dam breaking, the confession tumbled out. Dorothy wasn't the first. There had been others. Names I didn't know. Faces I had never seen. He admitted it as though he had been carrying the weight for years, like this was his twisted version of relief. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't just lost a partner to a single betrayal. I had been living with a man whose loyalty was nothing but an illusion, a serial betrayal disguised as love. The words hit harder than I expected. I thought discovering Dorothy was enough, that the sting of my closest friend's betrayal was the deepest cut. But this revealed that the ground I had been standing on all these years was nothing more than quicksand. Every memory, every smile, every promise, it all felt hollow now. Yet strangely, with the heartbreak came clarity. I could finally see Franklin for who he truly was. Not the stable, loving man I thought I had found, but a performer who had rehearsed his lines with countless women before me. And the truth, as painful as it was, set something inside me free. I sat there in silence, letting his confession hang in the air. My heart ached, my eyes burned, but my spine felt straighter than it had in months. I wasn't the woman who would crumble under this revelation. I was the woman who now knew the truth and would decide what came next. The lies were over, the mask was off, and for the first time, I felt the faint outline of a path forward, one that belonged to me alone. For a long time after Franklin's confession, I sat in silence, not because I didn't have words, but because I had too many. They tangled in my chest like vines, choking me with years of disappointment and betrayal. I thought about every holiday dinner we shared, every late-night conversation where I had opened my heart. Every morning, I believed I was waking up beside a man who truly loved me. And I realized none of it had been what I thought it was. At first, that realization broke me. I grieved, not just for the marriage, but for the years I had given so freely, believing they were being cherished. I felt like a woman standing in the ruins of a house she had spent decades building, only to learn the foundation had been rotting all along. But then, as the grief spread through me, something else started to rise, a quiet, steady strength that had always been there, waiting for me to claim it. Franklin had taken my trust, my love, my loyalty. But what he hadn't taken, what he could never take, was my spirit, my ability to choose what happens next. That, I realized, belonged to me. So, I made my decision. I ended the marriage, not with a screaming match or dramatic ultimatums. I ended it with the calm certainty of a woman who finally understood her worth. I chose to walk away, not because I wasn't strong enough to stay, but because I was finally strong enough to leave. It wasn't easy. Walking out meant facing loneliness, facing questions from people who would never understand, and facing the mirror each morning with no one standing behind me. But it also meant freedom. It meant waking up without suspicion, without lies, without waiting for the next betrayal. It meant reclaiming the pieces of myself I had given away far too cheaply. I don't look back at those years as wasted anymore. Painful, yes, but wasted, no. They taught me what I will no longer accept, and they showed me that even in heartbreak, I am capable of courage. At 68, I am not done. I am not broken. I am beginning again. So now, when I think of Franklin, it's not with anger, but with clarity. He is a chapter I have closed, a cautionary tale written into my story, but not the ending of it. My ending, no. My continuation belongs to me. And to anyone listening right now, I want you to hear this. It is never too late to choose yourself. It is never too late to walk away from what diminishes you and step toward what restores you. If my story has touched you, if you felt even a flicker of recognition in my words, then I ask you share this. Comment below. Tell me what strength you've found in your own life. Because we heal together, and we rise stronger when we know we're not alone. It was such a small thing, a thread of gold against the navy wool of Franklin's jacket. At first, I thought it was a stray piece of lint, something carried in from outside. But when I leaned closer, I saw it for what it really was, a long, shimmering strand of blonde hair. I froze. My own reflection in the hallway mirror looked back at me with eyes wide and searching. At 68, my hair is silver, cropped neatly at my shoulders. Franklin's, what's left of it, is dark and thinning. Neither of us had hair like this. My chest tightened as I pinched the strand between my fingers. It was smooth, younger somehow, feminine, and it did not belong to me. I wish I could say I shrugged it off, tossed it into the trash, and went on with my evening. But the truth is, that little thread set off an earthquake inside me. Suddenly, the floor of our marriage didn't feel so steady anymore. From the outside, Franklin and I looked like a couple who had it all figured out. We were the ones neighbors waved to as we watered the garden together. The couple who sat side by side in church pews, who brought casseroles to community dinners. After losing my first husband, I thought finding Franklin was a miracle. He was kind, attentive, even charming in a quiet way. I let myself believe I'd been given a second chance at love, and yet here I was, standing in our hallway, holding proof that something wasn't right. That hair glared at me like evidence from a crime scene. My mind began racing, replaying little moments I had overlooked: the late returns home, the phone calls he'd step outside to take, the way his eyes sometimes darted to the clock mid-conversation. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. After all, there could be a dozen explanations. Maybe a stranger brushed past him at the grocery store. Maybe the dry cleaner mixed things up. I tried so hard to believe in these maybes. But the more I stared at that hair, the more those excuses fell apart. My heart ached as I thought about the life I thought we were building. Sunday morning breakfasts, road trips to the coast, nights spent on the porch swing with tea in hand. Was it all real? Or just a stage for something else going on behind my back? I tucked the hair into a tissue and slipped it into the bottom of my drawer, as though hiding it could somehow bury the suspicion growing inside me. But I knew it was too late. Once a seed like that takes root, it spreads. That night, I couldn't look at Franklin the same way. The sound of his voice, the way he draped his arm over my shoulder as we watched the evening news, it all felt tainted. I wanted to believe in him. I really did. But the doubt was there now, whispering in my ear, pulling me apart from the inside. I had no answers yet, only a question that gnawed at me with every breath. Who did that hair belong to? And why was it on my husband's jacket? That was the beginning of it all, the moment suspicion entered my home and refused to leave. And from that moment on, I couldn't stop myself from watching Franklin more closely.